I think you can't underestimate the value of knowing your numbers. And if you can get to that point and slow down enough on the trade side that you start tracking those things.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk Podcast, our regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. I'm joined by Bryan Uhler, Vice President of Pioneer Builders, and producer Jeff Rose. Please email your questions to fapodcast@taunton.com. You can find this podcast and the Fine Homebuilding regular podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can also leave your feedback and ask questions there too. Bryan, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
So for those of you listening, this is the second version of the Pro Talk podcast that we're doing, where we talk to industry pros, and hopefully you get better advice than you would get from the ordinary podcast team. So thanks to Bryan for being here, and thanks to all of you for listening. Oh man, so we were just talking before we started recording, and let's start off, Bryan, can you tell us a little bit about your company's business, what you guys do, and who works there, and when it started?
Sure. So it's Pioneer Builders, Inc. My dad started the business actually with another gentleman back in 1978. That didn't last too long in terms of the partnership. So it's pretty much been a family business since probably 79 or 1980, somewhere around there. My dad, he started it. He was actually a farmer from, farmer from North Dakota. He was the first of his family. There were 8 kids. He was number 2 in line, and he was the first to go to college. He just happened to land on finance and accounting. And that was about the time that the Vietnam War was happening. So he kind of saw what was coming down the pipeline there. So he actually joined the military, and he was part of the real estate corps.
What?
So he was in, yeah, I know. I think when all of us hear Vietnam, you think, Forrest Gump or Platoon or something like that. But he was helping to manage leases in Saigon that the military rented. So he was just this, early 20-something kid who was managing some pretty high dollar things there, but he was basically just an accountant for the government. So when he got back, he was from North Dakota. My mom's from North Dakota. My mom and her family had moved out here to Washington. My grandpa was a banker, but when Dad came back, there wasn't a job at the bank as had been anticipated. So I don't remember who it was that said, well, hey, I think Charlie might need somebody. So Dad met with Charlie Ryan. He had a general contracting company. They did light commercial and residential. And Dad ended up doing the books for him. So I think the title officially was comptroller, but that's really where Dad learned job costing. And so he learned the back door, the back office side of construction. And he also started to learn superintending and job site management. So as he's working there for a while, he was working with another lady who, funny thing is, her company still does our taxes. There was a time period where it was a hiatus. She's been an accountant since the 50s. So anyway, my dad worked with her, and he saw Charlie just kept, although it probably wasn't termed this way, investing too much in capital expenses like heavy equipment. What that really meant was that I think Charlie's brother or brother-in-law really liked equipment. And so Charlie kept buying equipment for him, and Dad could see it was not a smart thing. So he kept complaining. So this lady who was, in effect, kind of like a business mom to my dad was like, Tim, you can either shut up and stop complaining or just stop worrying about it. Or no, yeah, that's what it was. You can either shut up and stop complaining or you can leave. Not like she was telling him you're fired, but just, you got to do something. It's not good. So that's what Dad did. In about 1978, 77 is when he left Charlie and started up a construction company. And that guy, he had 6 spec homes with 2 brand new children or pretty young children in the late 70s. And if you know economic history, that was not the time to start a construction company. But he did that. He was a framer. He did his finished carpentry, and he just made it work. So he paid himself wages. He knew his costs, and I think that's part of the difference between our company. He had the background of being in a construction firm in the 70s. So for him to make the jump to being a spec builder, he already kind of had that intrinsically in him, as opposed to a number of guys that you talk to that started out as a carpenter, working out of a truck, hiring on, and then growing organically that way. He just jumped in with 2 feet forward into that.
And do you still do spec building, right? And how many people are in the company, and what do you do there?
Yeah, right now we're pretty much shut down, but that's in terms of the coronavirus snapshot. But generally speaking, we are a spec builder. However, having that 42 years of history, we've done an ample number of custom homes. And the way we define a custom home is we build your home for you on your land. So there's a little bit of a risk shift there. We've done probably more pre-sales than customs, where we own the land and then we'll have the customer come to us, but we still own the real property. And so again, that risk shifts the balance a little bit more in our favor. And then for the last probably couple of years, we've been able to do just exclusively specs, and that's where we build on our land, our home plans. Spec can kind of sound like maybe a cookie cutter. So if I can use the term, they're more like custom specs, where sometimes we do build the same house plan multiple times, but we always tweak the plan. We always change things. And then sometimes they're a true custom spec, like one that we're doing now is a basement with a main level and an upper floor. And it's just completely customized, the mechanical system, everything. So it's, but it's pretty streamlined that way.
Do you mind telling me what the spec homes sell for generally in a range?
No, I don't mind. And it really all depends because there is the land component. And so when you're talking to custom builders and you compare square foot costs, it may be a little easier to compare 2 homes. With us, since the land is packed in there, the land itself can vary in value depending on, view and all sorts of neighborhood, all of those parameters. We just sold one that was 1,700 square feet for, it's kind of a funny number. It was like, I don't know, 459, 678. And somewhere along the line, my dad heard from somebody that people like a number that sounds like it was arrived at with arithmetic.
I've heard that too.
And we do. So there it is. So there was that one. And then the one I was just referring to, it's like, I don't know, 4,000 some square feet. And that one, I just did the updating the costing on it the other day, and it's like $850. So quite the range, but there will be a lot of,
And what do you do there? And what do your family members do in the business?
So my dad has mostly turned over the company. We probably get together once to twice a week for an actual just sit down. I've got my list of things. He likes to be involved. And so there's things he and mom will do. Mom helps with the finishes. So they'll go to the slab guy. They'll pick out all of the colors and that type of a thing. And it's I'm part colorblind, so I am not the guy to be doing that. And we've done everything wrong, and they'll say it. Sometimes we've just completely blown it. And you kind of realize when that happens, it's not the end of the world. Obviously, if you're building a luxury home for a customer, it's a different animal. But when it's a spec home and you do something a little wrong, the spec buyer isn't looking at it the same way that a custom buyer does. So anyway, there's that side of things. Timmy, my brother, he does our framing, our foundation work, our exterior cladding, really the structure. And Dad decided to pull our framing in-house years and years ago because of controlling the schedule. Instead of a framing subcontractor who might just show up for a day or two to kind of satisfy you and then jump to somebody else and you don't see them and then they come back for just a little bit, we can just control that whole thing, which is huge. I was thinking about it in preparation for this. The main jurisdiction we build in is 2 weeks out for inspections. And if you fail it, man, that can really goof up your schedule. But in addition, to be able to have the guys that you can schedule in to know this is the date that we need to hit for shear wall inspection. So anyway, Timmy does that. He does way more than that, though. We do plan reviews. The designer that we typically work with, we've been working with him for so long that he knows how to design the way we build. So like he's got the zip wall as part of our section drawing, PVA primer on part of the section drawing. Then we also work with the same engineer all the time. He knows how Timmy stick builds. And so the drawings are fairly close already, but there's things like a glue lam that Jay, our designer, might not realize is in 1.5-inch increments because they're 2-by material. Well, Timmy can look at the plan and right away know that that's the wrong size beam. Terry, our engineer, earns more per dollar than pretty much all of us. And so the more work we can do up front on our plans, the cheaper it is going to be for him to have to design, do the engineering, that part of things. So anyway, that's just to say Timmy is not just a framer or a foundation worker. He gets it. And so,
does he manage your subs too?
Not so much. That's a good question. We use the same subs for pretty much every job. We are an extended family with everybody. So I know that I can have Timmy on site and explain something to him for him to go over with the trades. But generally speaking, Timmy's value is as a framer. It is the structure side of things. What we're actually up against right now that I think is a little unique is being a 40-year-old company. Dad started it in his mid-20s or so. I don't know, in his 20s. Well, I'm 39. I'll be 40 here in, 2 months. Timmy's in his 40s. So I just had this conversation with Dad that we're not young men. So Timmy hurts more, not from injury, but just it's just kind of part of getting older. So we're in this transition period of instead of the 60-year-old turning it over to the 25-year-old, we can't just be field men. So we're trying to figure out, for Timmy especially, what the transition will be for him. He does not want to get off of the job, so I think it'll just be a reduction. And actually, during this COVID thing, we've been talking about hiring on a person so that we can kind of have that field transition happening. We've got Kyle, to get back to your question. Kyle's worked for us for 15 plus years, something like that. We had a little pause during the recession. And then my brother-in-law works for us. He's an electrician by trade, more commercial than residential. But he's really my right-hand guy. He can do pretty much anything that we need. And you need that. For me, in my opinion, as a spec builder, there are so many little things that need to be done. And since we are a little bit family, even with the subcontractors, I don't needle the subs and, ride them roughshod. If they do something wrong and we have to fix it and they don't even know it ever happened, I don't really care. Because I know we're screwing things up sometimes and they have to work around us. So unless that balance gets so far out of whack, then the relationship's kind of like, yeah, there's something that needs to change here. But generally, if each side is giving, it's just not worth pointing out everybody's mistake all the time. Sometimes you just fix it and move on.
What's your brother-in-law's name?
Greg.
So Greg, when you said is a right-hand man a generalist, does that mean physically trade work or as far as the business aspect? So he has skills in all the sub-trades.
Yeah. So for example, we've got our own blower door. We've got our own duct blaster. And my best use of time is really helping to maintain the business, the building science side of things, kind of I hate to use the word, but kind of the cerebral stuff that you have to just be thinking about. And that is not to minimize the trade work, because that is you can't get it done without everybody. But I just have to recognize, no, you have to give that up. There is this blue collar, white collar thing. And you're like embarrassed to say that, yeah, I run the books. I'm not in the field pounding nails. I'm doing this and that. And it's just like, you know what? You have to own it and just realize that is what it is. So I can tell Greg, hey, can you grab all the blower door stuff? He can grab the blower door. He can get it all set up, do all the prep work, make sure that the house is sealed up, ready to go. And then we can do it together. And he understands the air sealing side of things to where when we fail, and we do, we can walk around with our caulking guns trying to find leaks. So he's not just a drone by any stretch of the imagination. And that's just one example. When it comes to underground piping, like for our downspout drains, he can do all of that. He gets it. He can prepare it for backfill. He and Timmy on a job that we're working on right now. And I helped on that one more. Greg was our truck driver for the most part. We did a curtain drain at the toe of a hill. There was a footing drain and a downspout drain that were not done correctly. So we just have a Kubota, and Timmy and Greg did all that work together. So I think something we hopefully got from Dad was just not to have an ego. Every element of obviously we have an ego, but in this case, every element of a job has to be done. And so if you've ever seen a drywall stalker, those guys are hauling 2 5/8 sheets of 4x12. They deserve just as much respect as the finished carpenter. And so that's always been Dad's mentality there. He has never had an ego when it comes to, well, I'm the business owner now. If the job needs to get done, if you're driving around on a Saturday and you see something needs to be moved, you just get the job done and move on with your life. And so I think Timmy's gotten that, and the other guys too, that you just get.
Does that come from growing up on a farm, Bryan? Do you think?
It's funny because my Uncle Terry has been very successful. The family, they don't all have that. They probably all have that mentality. But Dad was the one who would save up his allowance, and they did not get much allowance. So I think Dad's always had that numbers side of things, but he never taught that to me in terms of let's sit down and have a conversation about debits and credits. So when I was 16, 17, I got a credit card from a department store, because if I did, I got 10% off the first purchase. So I did it. And then thereafter, I paid it in full because it just made sense. I got my 10% off, and now this is what I'm going to be doing. It never entered my mind to go, it's probably a $500 limit. Well, now I'm going to max that out and make a minimum monthly payment. I never had that concept. It's only later when you find out about what credit card debt can do to somebody, and you're like, oh. So I don't know how much of that's just kind of genetic and how much you pick up from, nature versus nurture. You
just touched on it. Perhaps your genius is bookkeeping and financial stuff. And you told me in a past conversation that you enjoy it. It's not like glamorous work, but you like understanding that stuff. What software, what systems do you use to track that for your business? And have you tried other things? What's working for you?
We use QuickBooks Pro, and we've used that. Actually, that's even kind of a funny story. My sister used to do the bookkeeping for us, and they used a software. Oh, I don't know if she'll listen to this, but she'll listen to it right now and she'll know exactly what the software was, and I can't remember it. In 1999, I think my dad, he probably bought it. QuickBooks Contractor is what it was called. And 1999, it was probably like at a JLC or, some trade show that he had heard about. So he took me as this 19-year-old kid so I went to college for, it was called Running Start. So for 11th and 12th grades, I went to community college. So the state paid for the funding, essentially. We just had to pay for the books. So by the time I got out of high school, I basically had 2 years of education that was college education. Just because you went to school for accounting does not mean you understand accounting. Certainly not cost accounting for a construction firm. I remember my dad, we used to keep a handwritten checkbook. And it was really nice to have that transition. When I first started, I actually wrote job costing out by hand with some of the elements. And I never learned a 10 keypad. And so I would be reconciling maybe 100 transactions in a month and blow it. And I would give it to him, and he would just, like his hand was his hammer, do a 10 keypad and be able to find. It was a clerical mistake. So I had to teach myself that skill. So those are the things that if you can teach yourself to be, if you are interested in the business side, to get into that, learn how to use your tools. So with QuickBooks, I set up the books, but then we had a lady who works for the lady who my dad used to work for in the 70s. So there's like full circle. She came to our office and helped take the existing software that my sister was using, that data, and bring it into QuickBooks. And so I did some of the setups like the item codes and how it related to the chart of accounts. And I didn't have a clue how any of that actually worked. It was like reading a manual, doing the work, but having no concept of how this relates to that. And so anyway, I just realized the other month, I've been running the books for 20 years in QuickBooks. I'll bet you my keystrokes are in the millions when you figure out. I mean, it's crazy. And I was thinking about Timmy. He's got to be over 1 million fasteners installed when you just think about it.
Yes.
So when you get 20 years of doing anything, you just have so much built-in muscle memory that you don't have to think in terms of a lot of the step-by-step, but you're able to conceptualize more, if that makes sense.
Many people in the construction industry admit that the financial side is where they fall down. And it's oftentimes, people don't get into the trades for that part of it, right? It's because they want to work with their hands. Do you have any advice for those people? And there's so many. Like, how do you keep better track of your business if you don't want to?
I don't know what the answer is to that, but I think to use an athletic analogy, we all know we shouldn't have McDonald's every day. We know we should go for a walk today. But some people do it and some people don't. And I think we've all known people who get to this point where they change. And so I think it's just an intrinsic, hey, I'm hitting 40. I want to be around for my daughter, so I'm just going to start doing such and such. I think you can't underestimate the value of knowing your numbers. And if you can get to that point and slow down enough on the trade side that you start tracking those things and recognizing that the business has to be healthy so that when black swan events happen, you can weather the storm like we're dealing with now. Although I think this is the most unusual financial event in United States history. I know that's a huge expression, but that's my personal opinion.
We've never seen job losses like we have in this event. So, I mean, that alone makes it singular, right? On that point, there are a lot of people who have lost their jobs and might be considering entering the trades, or could be convinced to join the workforce in residential housing. Do you think that those people be good contractors or tradespeople, and should we be recruiting them as an industry to help with our labor shortage? Admittedly, right now is not the time that we're going to be gearing up, but when this is over, they say there's going to be a boom again.
Yeah, and that would be my, I can't foretell the future. That would be my guess as well. Because this is not a financial crisis. It's an external pandemic. So everybody's in this together. It's not like bailing out, a huge investment firm who perhaps has not acted ethically, and then it causes problems with society. This is one that has affected across every demographic, and everybody is empathetic toward each other. And so because of that, I feel like the United States government and probably global economies, the World Bank, all of those can attack this in the future. I don't know about the recruiting side of things. I can tell you just from a very small microcosm with our business, I think that residential construction is going to break loose in Washington State before a lot of other industries. So that might be the market factor that would get people into the trades, is because there's something to do. The Small Business Administration, they can try as they will. It's like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a spoon, what they're trying to accomplish right now. But if there's jobs to be had, they'll get filled because people have to work. In Washington, we have the fortunate term of being like the epicenter of the North American continent with the coronavirus. So we were here on the front lines as it was first starting, and we got shut down. Before that happened, we were, I've got a Voxer group app that I use with the guys. We were talking about it. We were going to be doing the social distancing. And it was like, well, I see this coming. And so they shut us down. I also think we're going to be one of the first that comes back. And we're already talking about hiring a guy. So that's kind of what I can see happening.
Do you think that the skill sets for folks who are in the service industry lend themselves to the construction business?
I just listened to Sean Van Dyke's this morning in preparation for this, and I heard his thoughts about that. I don't think construction is a difficult job. I think if you can have a culture of teaching and training, anybody can do it, and it's fun. But if you have kind of this spirit or this mentality of the new person is going to be demeaned or not treated with respect or given just the grunt jobs, that's something for Timmy. He has never been the person to have everybody else do the work. As he's getting older, that's something he's going to have to learn, is that you can't, but it's not an ego thing. It's a physical thing. So if you can have that company culture, it doesn't matter who comes onto the job. They're going to do just fine.
You, in a past conversation, I've been very impressed that your company stresses a life-work balance. You've told me that you don't work 50, 60, even 50, 60 hours a week, which is very common for small construction firms. Do you mind telling me how many hours a week you figure you work?
I don't mind. I just don't know. I don't keep a time card. I think I tend to be cut from the same cloth as my father. What needs to get done gets done. and as long as it takes is as long as it takes. When it comes to work, I do a lot of, I'm involved with the design side for our religious buildings. So using the word work, it's like, I don't know, if you included that in there, yeah, I've got a lot of time. But is it, for me, and this is going to sound maybe kind of lame, most of this isn't really work for me. It's part of what you do because it's what you do. So I'm just going to say somewhere between 30 to 35 hours a week of working for Pioneer Builders. But on the weekend, if I have to meet with a homeowner, if I have to run out and take care of something, how do you count that time? Which is probably why I don't. So yeah, as far as the work-life balance, though, I think a big part of it is we have tried to be as efficient as we possibly can and even simplify and streamline what we do as a company. So it doesn't take as much time to maintain as it would if you were always trying to fix a broken down vehicle. You keep your oil changed, you keep your tires rotated. Yeah, there's going to be those one-offs where you have to call AAA, but for the most part, you're going to just be able to keep moving forward.
What are some of those things that you feel like most small construction businesses could do better in that regard? What systems are they lacking that make it easier to be a contractor and have a better work-life balance?
I think, and this has been a topic of conversation on Instagram, it's recognizing the tolerance of what's acceptable. And so I do better framing. You'd asked that earlier. Yeah, I had nail bags on, especially during the Great Recession. Timmy and I, we were down to a 2-man framing crew. We hung all the drywall in a house. Thank goodness for the drywall finisher. And you know what? We didn't have any callbacks on that house for drywall, as I recall. But yeah, you got to do what you got to do. So let's see. What were we just talking about? I lost track.
Systems. Like how can small contractors improve their systems so they don't have to work as many hours or as hard?
Yeah. So I am better at framing than I am at finish carpentry because there's more of a tolerance. We count things in 16ths of an inch instead of eighths when we do our framing. But realistically, you can squeeze your blocking in and make it work. As opposed to finish carpentry, and with my personality, it's harder for me because I haven't done it repetitively enough to be able to take all my measurements, cut everything, and have it fit. One of the houses I did, man, I must have been back to the miter saw like 5 times sometimes on a cut, and it's a waste of time. So for me, framing, knowing where the tolerances are. If you're a finish carpenter, know what your tolerances are for that market. So if I'm building, and I don't do this, but if I'm building $100 million architectural digest house in Beverly Hills, you got to know what your tolerances are, and that's fine. Build that way. But don't get hung up on looking at Instagram and seeing people who will say, well, yeah, if my tile's off by 1/128th of an inch, tear it out because it's, quote, the right thing to do. That's just not true. What's the ethical thing to do? Well, for me, it's to build a structural house that's built to code that the people can live in and, if you follow code, be healthy in. And not get too hung up on what doesn't really matter. So I'm sure there's more to it than what I've just said, but I think that would be a good start for people, is don't compare yourself to Instagram people. Except me.
What is your Instagram? Just let's put that out there.
Pioneer Builders Inc. INC, not INK.
Awesome.
It's not a tattoo handle.
You said something to me that at first, when I first heard it, it doesn't sound all that profound, but I see so many small contractors struggling with. You said, know what you're good at and do that. How do you find what you're good at, and how did you guys find what you're good at?
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to how Dad got into the business. was as a spec builder. There's a whole financial side of being a landowner that a landscaper might not be aware of. So I've been involved in literally hundreds of escrow transactions. So recording the settlement statements, how the taxes work with all that, real estate agents' fees. And I don't have to think about it, if that makes sense. Because I've done it repetitively so many times, I'm fast at it. Whereas somebody else might own 3 homes in their life, and they're just signing papers because they have kids to, take care of, and they've just got a life to lead. So I think if you're a finish carpenter, become the best finish carpenter that you can possibly be. Know what fasteners to procure, where to get them. If you're in framing and you're providing your own materials, learn how to procure your materials and how market prices work. Well, a landscaper is not going to need to care about lumber prices for the most part, because what they're buying is just part of the landscaping. If you're a landscaper, understand backflow preventers. Why is that done? How does that relate to the municipal water supply? Become an expert, understand soils, research geotech, expansive soils. Maybe this is going overboard, but plastic limits, liquid limits, plasticity index for soils. Understand what you're doing and be as good at that thing as you possibly can be. For us, having 40 years of institutional knowledge, by the time you add all of us up together, we've got over a century of doing things right and doing things wrong. And we're just very blessed, in my opinion, because we get to touch from the ground, the tree felling, if that's what's part of the work, septic system design, engineering. We get to do everything. And I love all of those things. So I get to really dig into all of it and try to become good at everything. But for a trades contractor, do what you're the best at, but be willing to branch out when you have to. So like we've talked about doing light commercial. Dad has experience in it. I don't particularly. But if we were having financially hard times, I would do that. But I wouldn't do it just for the sake of expansion. In that case, it would be for a need. And so if you don't have to branch out, I say stay as focused as you can and be as good at that one thing as you can and see how that works.
Man, this is so good. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I was nervous, but you guys are so nice. Jeff's up there with he just looks like a nice guy. It's wonderful.
He was painting all weekend. He's probably crippled, and that's why he's being so blasted.
He does have a bottle of something in the back there that I can see. So,
believe it or not, it's maple syrup.
Well, have a waffle on me.
All right.
Oh, man. Thanks so much for being on the show, Bryan. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Bryan Uhler for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your questions, comments, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Happy building.